Most things that people say to me just seem to slip my mind. Oh, but the suffering and painful times that were in years long gone are still as clear upon my memory as the numbers on my arm. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? Who will stand before the world knowing what to say when the very last survivor fades away? When I hold my grandson close to me and his fingers trace the pattern of my tears, he asks me, "Grandpa, tell me, why do you cry? What is it that you fear?" And I tell him there once was another child who smelled as sweet and felt this warm, but he was taken from before my eyes, and only I remain to mourn. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? And who will stand before a world that now wishes to deny? Or will they believe in someone who never heard the cries? There is nothing I can say or do to make things change. Time has a way of passing by so fast, and like a fleeting shadow, no one will recall the faces of the past. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? Yet one thought gives me comfort, it's all that I have left. Oh, I know that God in heaven won't forget.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rabbi Yossi Mintz, and on behalf of the Jewish Community Center, in conjunction with the Manhattan Beach Unified School District, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this historic evening of inspiration featuring a special encounter with Eva Schloss, the stepsister of the late, dearly beloved Anne Frank of blessed memory. Before we get to the heart of the program, I would like to take a moment and proudly and gratefully acknowledge the participation of many young people here with us this evening, whether students right from here, from Miracosta High School, or from other schools from local districts. I think it speaks volumes about the character, integrity, and seriousness of our youth, that they would voluntarily devote their evening of a free time to show up here at an event like this, to hear a story of sacrifice and absorb the message of devotion to a higher sense of values. So kudos to all the boys and girls for being here this evening. On that note, I would like to extend a special thank you to my dear friend, Manhattan Beach Unified School District Superintendent Mike Matthews, not only for making this magnificent event and this venue available for this evening, but of also helping us get the word out about this event to all the folks throughout the school district. Mike, you are a real mensch. Thank you to his assistant, Heather Hoffman, for all your help, and to Rabbi David, Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Levi, and all the volunteers who helped this evening run it so smoothly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here this evening because we've all been touched by one of the most widely read books of all time, published in more than 60 different languages, The Diary of Anne Frank. The powerful words of an innocent 13-year-old Jewish girl, so wise beyond her years, written over the course of 2 years as she and her family were hiding during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. Sadly, as we all know, the Frank family was discovered by the Nazis, and Anne Frank ultimately perished as a young teenager in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Reading Anne's diary leaves us with many heart-wrenching emotions and soul-searching questions. For one thing, we are struck by how, even in the face of such hatred and cruelty, this sweet, unassuming, expressive young lady never loses her innocence nor her appreciation for the blessings of life and the beauty of this world. She never loses her faith in God and the essential goodness of all humanity, even having witnessed the lowest depth to which some human beings were capable of sinking. To quote her words, "In spite of everything, I still believe in people that are really good at heart." On February 23rd, 1944, almost exactly 74 years ago to the day, Anne Frank wrote in her diary, "The best remedy for those who are frightened and lonely or unhappy is to go outside somewhere where you can be alone with the sky, nature, and God. For only then you can feel that everything is as it should be, and that God wants people really to be very happy." Indeed, in the eyes of fear, Anne Frank found courage. Amidst the anguish, she experienced joy. Amidst its despair, she knew hope. Amidst darkness, she saw light. She projected a form of courage, hope, and joy, and light for all of us to grasp onto when the forces of darkness, hostility, and negativity rear their ugly heads. You know, initially this event was scheduled many months ago. But in light of the horrific and senseless attack that took place a few weeks ago in Parkland, Florida, Anne Frank's lesson and legacy are especially relevant to these current times. My friends, the best response to evil is goodness. The best response to darkness is light. More light, and still more light. A single candle kindled in darkness can light up a whole entire place. Just a little bit of light dispels a whole lot of darkness. Anne Frank showed us that. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, my mentor, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, insisted that there would be no abiding victory for Hitler, no victory for evil, hatred, or cruelty. Even as our people were broken, disenchanted, and disillusioned by the terrible loss and destruction we suffered, the Rebbe proceeded to inspire rebuilding Jewish communities all over the world, bigger, better, and more vibrant than ever before. If Hitler wanted to hunt down every Jew in hate, the Rebbe wanted to track down every single person in love. Track them down and bring them closer. Hug them, bring them, teach them values and traditions. And this is what our work at the JCC and the Friendship Foundation, which we run, is all about. So what I want to tell everyone here today, this evening, especially to all the young people in the room who were surely affected in the recent events that took place, the world is not a jungle. It's a sanctuary ruled and sustained by a loving Father who wishes that his children treat it and each other with dignity and compassion, respect. Let us all work together to bring more love, goodness, and kindness into the communities, in our communities, and around the world. For every psychopath seeking to hurt a fellow human being, God forbid, let there be 10 million of us seeking to help our fellow human being. This is how we create life and continue the legacy of Anne Frank in a positive and productive manner. With that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to share a few words to my friend and the proud superintendent of the Manhattan Beach School District, Dr. Mike Matthews, to share a few words.
Thank you, Rabbi. Once again, I'm taking note never to follow him after speaking. Your words were perfect, Rabbi. When Rabbi Yossi called me and said, can we make this happen, I knew the answer had to be yes. I didn't know how it was going to be yes, but I knew the answer had to be yes. I want to thank a few people for really doing the hard work to make it happen. Carrie and Michael, our amazing staff here in the auditorium, have done everything to make this happen. My amazing executive assistant, Heather Hoffman, did so much of the work behind it. I know Ben Dale is here as well, our principal. And so many other people. We wanted to make this happen, and we're proud and honored to be a part of this event. So many of the things I wanted to briefly discuss are what Rabbi Yossi already mentioned. It's a pretty scary time right now to be in schools. The Parkland, Florida incident is something that is still hitting us and will be hitting us for a long time. Every one of us believes it could be us. And so it's a time of fear, and it's a time to rise above that fear. I am filled with hope anyway. As an educator, I'm always an optimist. And most of that hope for me right now revolves around our youth. If you are a elementary, middle, or high school or college student here, would you stand up? I want to see how many of y'all are here today. I know a number of you are here. Thank you all for standing. Here's why I have the hope that I have. Anne Frank is a perfect example of a youth who, through her writing, through her spirit, through her courage, made a difference. I've read a number of articles. So many of us right now are looking to our youth more than ever to help us at this time. I don't think since the 1960s has there been a time when many of us believe if the adults can't do the job, maybe our youth can. We're with you. We're with you. I'm also filled with hope because this community, and Rabbi Yossi and I have had this conversation, this community believes in inclusion. We are not a perfect community by any means, but we are a place that desires to make ourselves better. Our Board of Trustees here in our district made inclusion one of our primary goals a couple of years ago. Most of our boards in the audience tonight, and we want to make that happen. We've sat down with synagogue leaders, with church leaders, with city officials, with interested, involved parents. We are all committed to inclusion, and this is a perfect example of a community event that can bring us all together. We're here to listen. We're here to be inspired. We're here to hear words that will give us courage, because we all will face that moment where we have to be courageous to do the right thing. And we as parents and future parents all must teach our children the same things. So thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your courage. Ms. Schloss, thank you for being here to inspire us, and we can't wait for this important event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. To invite the honor the guest speaker this evening, which really brought tremendous honor to our entire community. And I'm very proud. When we started this, we put it first at our own center, and immediately it filled up. So congratulations for the over, I think they said 1,300 people here this evening. It's a true honor and privilege to call up the mayor of the most wonderful city in America. When I got married, I grew up in Brooklyn, and my wife was from California. And my wife said to me, if I'm going to live in New York, we're going to live in Manhattan. Little did she know, we ended up living in Manhattan. So it's my honor to call up the mayor of this beloved city, my dear friend Amy Howard, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Yossi. I have to say, the honor is all mine. I mean, I get to do a lot of important things, fun things in my time as city council person, school board member, mayor. But tonight feels really special to get to introduce a Holocaust survivor, Ms. Eva Schloss, to be a part of a community that is openly talking about the world as it is and how we want to support our future leaders, our youth, is really a tremendous honor. And I am so proud of Manhattan Beach and all who have come to Manhattan Beach to fill up the auditorium to hear what has to be said, because it's important. And we are losing our opportunities to hear the histories of the survivors. So it's terrifically important that we're all here. Generations of people now have grown up reading Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. It's a cornerstone of Holocaust education, and in fact, all education. And tonight we get the honor of hearing from Eva Schloss, Anne Frank's stepsister. I first read Anne Frank's diary when I was 12, and I must have read it 10 times since. And each time with a different emotional response. First, as a 12-year-old, disbelief that people actually treated each other like that. Secondly, fear that it could happen to me. But I always ended up with the resolve to be courageous and to stand up for others and do the right thing and help, like the employees of the Franks did for them. Rabbi Yossi mentioned the line that I actually think shaped how I look at the world, which is, in spite of everything, I still believe the world, the people of the world are really good at heart. And it had a huge impact on me, I think, my entire life, because you get to choose how you view the world and how you face it. And if she could express that, surely I could. When my family recently, well, many years ago now, but had a one-day layover in Amsterdam, I knew that we had to go visit the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. It was very emotional for me because you actually see the cupboard that hid the hiding place, her diaries on display, the cutouts of movie stars that she cut out are there on the walls. It was incredible. It was a sense of them all still there. As I always read the book, I always focused on Anne. Really, I think we all did. I didn't really think much about her father, Otto Frank. And the museum that accompanies the house had an exhibit about him. And it gives a glimpse of who he was. And this quote of his stood out to me now as a mother of teenage sons. And my conclusion, since I had been in very good terms with Anne, was that most parents don't really know their children. And like I said, as a grown woman with 2 teenage sons, these words stopped me in my tracks. So here, Anne's words spoken to me as a 14-year-old, and Otto Frank's words speaking to me as a parent. And it shows how much of a universal truth is present in these important works. Her words influenced how I wanted to relate to the world, and his influenced how I wanted to relate to my sons. And now, Eva Schloss, who is a survivor of not just the war, but of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. And she's provided me with another set of words that speak to who I aspire to be today. She writes, "Everything you do leaves something behind. Nothing gets lost. All the good you've accomplished will continue in the lives of the people you have touched. It will make a difference to someone, somewhere, sometime. And your achievements will be carried on. Everything is connected like a chain that cannot be broken." What a remarkable group of people that wrote words like this, and especially for Eva, who endured the torturous evils of the camp and writes without bitterness and anger and with hope. And to me, writing those words of hope and trying to spread peace today is a radical act. Today, youthful Eva is a novelist, teacher, humanitarian, and she's committed to sharing survivor stories, not just her own, with the world. We're extraordinarily lucky to have her here tonight. She will be joined by Rabbi Yossi on stage here, who will have a conversation with her. And again, incredible thanks to Rabbi Yossi for bringing her here tonight. I think we're all very grateful. So it is my extraordinary honor to bring up to the stage Ms. Eva Schloss and Rabbi Yossi.
Anne Frank has become famous because of the diary she wrote during the Second World War. For more than 2 years, Anne and her family and 4 acquaintances managed to hide in an uninhabited building in Amsterdam. But the family are betrayed. The Nazis take them to concentration camps. Anne dies in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp just because she's Jewish. Anne was only 15 years old. When Adolf Hitler comes to power in Germany in 1933, Anne is almost 4 years old. The supporters of Hitler's political party are called Nazis. They blame Jews for the bad economical situation in the country. Jews, but also disabled people, homosexuals, Roma and Sinti, and people with dark skin aren't safe in Nazi Germany anymore. That's why the Frank family moves from Germany to the Netherlands in 1933. They hope that they will be safe in the Netherlands. Anne really enjoys herself in Amsterdam. She goes to school and has lots of friends. But in 1940, the German army invades the Netherlands. Within 5 days, the Netherlands are conquered and occupied. What happened in Germany may happen in the Netherlands now. Life becomes tougher, especially for the Jews. The occupier also passes laws in the Netherlands which exclude Jews.
Our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use trams. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars. You couldn't do this and you couldn't do that. But life went on.
Discrimination laws aren't the only oppressive measures against the Jews. Nazis round up Jews in Germany and the occupied countries in Europe, put them on trains, and take them to concentration camps. That's why the Frank family and 4 acquaintances hide in the offices of Opekta, Otto Frank's company. They're helped by Otto's loyal staff members. They stay there for more than 2 years. Anne keeps herself busy during those long days with reading and writing in her diary. She writes about her family, friendship, love, and the future. She is afraid, but she doesn't give up hope.
I know what I want. I have a goal. I have opinions, a religion, and love. If only I can be myself, I'll be satisfied. I'll make my voice heard. I'll go out into the world and work for mankind.
On the 4th of August, 1944, police officers enter the hiding place. The people in hiding have been betrayed. They are arrested and transported to concentration camps. Anne's diary is left behind. What happened to her after that, we only know through eyewitnesses. Anne dies of disease and exhaustion in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. During the Second World War, the Nazis and their accomplices killed 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. Anne's father, Otto Frank, is the only one of the 8 people in hiding who survives the concentration camps. He makes sure that Anne's dream of becoming a writer comes true by publishing her diary. The book is called The Secret Annex. Otto Frank hopes that readers become aware of the dangers of discrimination, racism, and anti-Semitism. Today, the diary has been translated into nearly 70 languages and is read all over the world. In her diary, Anne writes,
Unless you write yourself, you can't know how wonderful it is. I always used to bemoan the fact that I couldn't draw, but now I'm overjoyed that at least I can write. And if I don't have the talent to write books or newspaper articles, I can always write for myself.
Good evening. It's an honor to have you here.
Good evening.
I'd like to again thank you really for joining us here this evening. She comes all the way across the Atlantic to spend a few weeks traveling around the United States and heading back next week. I suppose to make everyone aware, let's try to go back to your early childhood, before all the chaos began. I believe you lived with a beautiful family, growing up in Vienna and moving to Belgium and eventually settling in Amsterdam. So please take us through a little bit the history of your childhood before the chaos began.
Well, I was born in Vienna in 1929 in a quite big Jewish family. We had grandparents, aunt, uncle, cousins, and I had an older brother. And Austria was a beautiful country. Perhaps there was anti-Semitism, but nevertheless we mixed with everybody. You didn't ask, are you Jewish, are you Catholic? Austria is a Catholic country, so at that time most people were Catholic. And the difference was with America, for instance, that you had to have Jewish education in school, or Christian education. So Jewish children were called out. In my class there were about 7 Jewish children, and we had twice a week, we went to a different classroom and we learned Bible stories, we learned a little bit of Hebrew, and then we went back to our class, and that was accepted. There was no, looking at us that we were different. And of course, as soon as Hitler marched in, the Austrian population became, I would say, even more anti-Semitic than in Germany. The people stood with the big swastika flags waving and with a Heil Hitler salute, and immediately they started to attack Jewish people. My brother, who was 12 years old, he came home and he was badly, badly beaten up. And when my parents asked him what has happened, he said his own friends did that and the teachers watched it. My best friend was a little Catholic girl, and after school on my way home, I usually popped in there for some gossip and a bit of playing. But that day, the same day, when the mother saw me, I saw she looked already, from the distance, she looked already very, very cross. And when I came, she said, "We never want to see you here again." And she slammed the door in my face. I was 9 years old, and I went home crying, and I said to my mother, "I don't understand, we didn't have a quarrel." And my mother said, "Well, for Jewish people, life is going to be very, very, very difficult from now on." So, as a 9-year-old, I couldn't understand why suddenly things has changed. And we were actually lucky as a family that we were able to get out. We lost many, many of our family members who were not so lucky to get a visa, and that was really the catastrophic thing about the Holocaust, that by 1938 it was already very, very, very difficult, if you were an ordinary person, to get a visa anywhere in the world for safe passage. If you were a well-known writer, or like Freud, he was from Vienna, he was able to get to England, or a famous person, a doctor or a scientist, yes, then you could get a visa. But as an ordinary person, it was practically impossible.
How did your family be able to achieve to get visas to leave Vienna?
Well, my father, he had a shoe factory and he had business in Holland. And actually, I think 2 days afterwards, when it was not organized yet, he just left. At that time, you could still do that. But you know, unless you have contact abroad, money outside or family, just to leave everything behind, you couldn't take anything with you. It's very, very difficult, you know. And especially when you were a bit elderly, you said, how can I start a new life? Just, you know, people were afraid. And people didn't believe that Hitler would carry on like this. And that was a tragedy, you know. Not every German believed and not every Austrian believed it was the right thing. But people were just not speaking up, they were bystanders. And that is something now that you mentioned and the mayor mentioned, that we have to speak up. We have not to be silent if we see even little thing, if we see injustice being done. We have to have the courage to try to change things.
So when you left Vienna, you ended up in Amsterdam as an 11-year-old, and you lived I read in your book.
Well, we saw the picture here, the Merwedeplein. That is where my father eventually was able to get a furnished apartment because we couldn't bring anything with us. We had to leave everything behind. And those were quite small apartments, but modern. And there were no gardens or yards, like you say here, to play. So the children came on this open place. They came all
This
out
was in
after
Amsterdam.
school in Amsterdam. They came to play there. And I was a new child there. And one day a little girl came to me and introduced herself, very well brought up. She said her name was Anne Frank. We were both 11 years old at the time, and she asked me where I come from. I said, from Austria. She said, oh, you speak German? I said, yes. So she took me to her apartment to meet her father and her mother and her older sister. And that is how I came to know the family. And we became friends. We were both 11 years old. And at that time, the children played hopscotch. I don't know if you know this anymore. And, and skipping and marbles. And, you know, all the children in the neighborhood knew each other. We went to each other for a cup of lemonade and biscuits. And there was an ice cream parlor. We went there. And, you know, it looked as if life was going good. I had an older brother, as I told you. He was at the time 15 years old. And Anne was actually, at that age, already very, very interested in boys. When I told her I had an older brother, she said, when can I come and visit you in your apartment? But my brother wasn't really interested in a little girl the age of his sister. But Anne actually in her diary writes quite a bit about boys. And she said her sister was not such a flirt, so she was 3 years older. And and Anne had, of course, not experienced anti-Semitism, and she was very sure of herself. And at school, she wrote already many little stories which she told in the class. But besides that, she was a very, very big chatterbox. She could never sit still and just do her work. And so her nickname was Mrs. Quack Quack. And very often she had to stay behind to write 100 lines of I'm not going to talk so much in class. But the next week she still talked again so much. She just couldn't help it.
They used to do it then also, give punishments of writing.
Writing. And as well, actually, she wrote already little stories, and actually they are published, but somehow they didn't make the same impact as the diary. But it does exist, you can look it up, and they're actually very nice stories for young children.
So, just to go back to that time you met Anne, and she was a month younger than you at that time. And then you were living there for a period of time. And then take us through the history, what happened when you were living in Amsterdam, and all of a sudden the Nazis came in to occupy Holland.
We came actually quite late to Amsterdam because we were first in Belgium, and in February 1940 we came to Amsterdam. And as I say, I settled in very well, and the Dutch were actually very welcoming. I got a bicycle. Everybody in Holland has a bicycle, and I was blonde and blue-eyed, so everybody said I fit in very well. And yeah, it looked as if things was going to be good, but it wasn't, because Hitler marched in very unexpectedly, like in Austria in a way, but the Dutch of course fought. The Austrians just welcomed him, but there was a war, 5 days, not very long, and it was in this war the first time that a civilian city had been bombed, Rotterdam, with 10,000 casualties. And the Dutch royal family escaped, which was not very encouraging for the population, first to England and later to Canada. And yeah, and the Dutch said, if you are not going to capitulate, we are going to bomb all your cities. So the Dutch government couldn't risk that, of course. And so after 5 days war, they gave up. And we still tried to go to the harbor to escape to England on a boat, but the last boat had gone. So we went back our apartment and thought, well, we'll see what happens. And actually nothing happened. And that was actually quite encouraging. So we thought perhaps the Germans are not going to do anything like they did in Germany and Austria. But they didn't want to put the Dutch population already as enemies, so they went very, very slowly with the measures against the Jewish population. But it all came, and just as bad as everywhere else.
So take us to that time. Please understand, everyone in the audience, that besides that they knew each other as young friends with Anne Frank, Ava and Anne, their stories mirrored very much alike.
Exactly.
When the Nazis finally put in their rules and regulations and started rounding up the Jewish people, your family decided to go into hiding, as the Frank family did. Could you explain and tell the audience what that meant, to go into hiding? Where did you hide? And tell us about the families that actually had the courage to really take the risk to hide a Jewish family, because if they were caught, they were also sent away.
Exactly.
So tell them exactly that moment when...
Well, after 2 years occupation, where measures were taken all the time. For instance, one of the very, very bad things was that we had to leave our schools and go to Jewish schools. By itself, you would say, well, so what? You have got good Jewish schools. But what happened, there was a lot of young people, and the Germans came with trucks, told several classrooms to go down into the truck, and in the evening the parents waited for the children to come home, and they didn't turn up, and they went to the police, where the children didn't get an answer. They went even to the Nazi police. Again, they didn't get an answer, and those children were never ever seen again. And only after the war did one hear they were sent to Mauthausen, which was a horrific Austrian death camp with cliffs, and they were just thrown from the cliffs. In Mauthausen, if ever anybody of you will go there, you will find an enormous monument for the early Jewish children who were deported there and murdered. So you can imagine, of course we didn't know what has happened, but we knew that the children had disappeared. So after 2 years, in June 1942, about 10,000 young people, probably all you students who are here, if you would have been Jewish and living in an occupied country, you would probably have been deported. And so my brother, who was 16, and Anne's older sister Margot, who was 16, and many, many of their friends, and even 20-year-old and 21-year-old, got this call-up notice to be deported to Germany. And that is when my father and Otto Frank and many other parents decided they wouldn't send their young people. So my father called us together one evening and said, I was very lucky to find wonderful Dutch people, usually members from the resistance. As you can imagine, there were many, many Dutch, French, Belgian, Norwegian people who were all occupied, didn't want a German occupation. And so they formed a movement called the Resistance, and they did all kinds of things. They shot particularly bad Nazis, they blew up trains, they printed ration cards, they helped pilots from England who were shot down, for instance, all kinds of wonderful things, risking their lives. And as well, they made, some of them, opened their homes to take in Jewish people. But my father told us we haven't found a family, because the apartment's actually very, very small, to take in 4 people, so we have to split up. And I started to cry. I didn't want to split up. And my father explained, if we were in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. Survive. And at 13 years old, that was the first time when I really became scared that it might be a matter of life and death, which of course it was.
So go through, so your family was, I understand, reading in your book, had to go to multiple places to hide because the locations where you were, either the individuals were afraid that they were going to get caught.
Well, the Nazis knew not everybody had appeared, and they really wanted to get every young Jew. And so they made house searches. So at night they knocked on doors, and every Dutch person had to open the door. You didn't have to have a certificate to search your house. They just entered and searched your home. And if they saw an object they wanted, a silver candlestick or a silver frame or a picture, they just took it. And but searched the home. And so we had in all our hiding places, and there were about 6 or 7, we had the people again from the resistance came and built a hiding place within the hiding place, meaning a false partition somewhere, or under the floorboard even, there was enough space to hide. And so when the bell was ringing or the knock on the door at night, it was always at night, we quickly went in there, hoping they wouldn't find us. So people became scared, you know, they had no peaceful night, and they said, well, after 3 months, 6 months perhaps, you have to move, we can't take the tension any longer. And many Dutch people were arrested, so that doesn't help, of course, you know, right. So people became scared.
So one of the last locations where you were found, you were actually betrayed by a nurse. Your father, you were in distant locations, and your father, you were with your mother, and your father was with your brother. Found a location for your father, a closer location, you write in your book, so the family could be together, at least to sneak out and meet each other.
I was very, very miserable in hiding. I missed my family, and I was a very active child, and in hiding you had to sit like we sit the whole day, and I could just read or knit perhaps or something, but that was not the thing I liked to do. I liked to be active. So that was, and so I was very, very unhappy, and so my parents decided we were both looking Dutch, we were both going and visit occasionally my father and brother. They only went out, they were both dark, they only went out when they had to change hiding place. Because again, walking in the street or going in a tram, very often the Nazis ask your ID card. And of course, if you didn't have any, you were taken away. So we take a big risk, but we did visit, and it was a Dutch nurse who really was a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis, but pretended she was a member of the resistance. And just to give you an illustration, what kind of women, of people those were who worked for the Nazi. Her boyfriend was a very important member in the resistance, and he had placed in that house where the nurse took all the people. 200 people were betrayed in that house. And he sometimes wanted to take a letter, for instance, from the parents to a child who had placed, and he said, can I take it to the child? The parents would like me to see their young boy, tell them how he's doing. She said, no, no, you can't go and see him. So she became a bit suspicious of him, that he was suspecting something, which he was. So she betrayed him, her own boyfriend, and as he was an important member of the resistance, he was shot. So, you know, this kind of people.
So I understand that this
they
nurse...
did it for money, partly for money, partly perhaps for power. I don't know.
This
the Dutch
nurse...
have a good reputation, but nevertheless there was a big amount of Nazis as well.
So this nurse, they said, was betrayed 200 as a double agent. It was told that she made $2 per find for the Nazis were paying.
Per person.
Equal at that amount. And later after the war, just to go to this story and we'll move on, she was identified. And she actually was brought to court, and you came and testified against her.
Not me, they didn't want me, I was too young, but my mother went to testify, and she only got 4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
Interesting. So take us now to the moment that you were betrayed and caught. It was, you knew you were betrayed because your father and brother were caught on the same exact day.
Yeah, but I didn't know that till a bit later, you know. So it was my 11th May, it was my 15th birthday, and we had just moved as well to a different hiding place, to people we had known before, and we were actually very happy to be there. And my father and brother moved to that place on the Sunday, and we went to visit them. On this day, my breakfast, there was a knock on the door, and the Nazis stormed in, and the straight went for my mother and me, because they knew, obviously, we were the Jewish
and
people
this was
they
your birthday.
wanted. It was my 15th birthday. And we were taken to the headquarters. I was taken into a tiny little room. You might see this in movies, just a table and lights, spotlights on you, and a big picture of Hitler on the wall. And 3 SS men stood there looking very, very fierce, and they threw me on a chair and starting to question me. They wanted to have information for me, and I was in shock. I just lost my voice. You know, it was a terrible moment, because I knew if you were arrested what might happen, you know. And then they started to beat me up really, really bad, and I still couldn't speak. Then they said they would kill my brother if I don't tell them who had helped us, and giving names. And then I realized that our whole family was betrayed, but I still couldn't understand how it happened. Eventually they let me go, and they threw me in a room, and there was my father and my brother and my mother. So that was one of my worst experiences till now. But I thought it can't get worse, but it was getting much, much worse. The first night we spent in a prison, and then we were taken on a transport to a holding camp, because the transport, big transport of 800, 900 people went regularly once a week to the east to different concentration camps and death camps.
If you could just go through the family that hid you was also taken into question.
Yeah.
And actually was brought in and sent away themselves. Explain to the audience what really brought a family to this family that you knew. What was the courage for them to risk their own life, you know, to really put, they knew others that were caught and were sent away, but yet they were willing to do it.
Well, you know, this is the difference between good and bad people. Those people really felt it's their duty to protect their fellow people. And Miep Gies, the Otto Frank and Anne Frank story is slightly different, because Otto Frank had this big office where it's quite interesting in Amsterdam. When you go there, the old homes on the canals are very, very narrow, because the Dutch were very mean at the time, so they were very rich merchants. but they had to pay a tax on the width of the house in front. So they built them very small but very, very deep. So this, where the office was a lot of rooms going in depth. And the Dutch version of the book is called Het Achterhuis, the house behind the house. And that was empty because Otto didn't need it as an office, and that is where the family was hiding. So there were a lot of little rooms behind the office space, and that's where 8 people were hiding.
So the Otto Frank family, Otto, the father of Ain, and a few months after, they were also identified and caught. And
They were betrayed. They were betrayed in August. We were betrayed in May. They were betrayed in August. We know who betrayed us.
That's the question, because I know there was a book that came out. Did Otto, the father, ever realize which one of his workers actually the one betrayed the Frank family?
No. There were a lot of court cases. There were suspected different people, but they never could prove anything. So in 1962, Otto had to go to court always when there was a court case, and he was very nervous, and it made him very sad always. And in 62 he said, I don't really want to know anymore. It won't bring the family back. And so at that time they gave up. But now even there are people say they know who it was, and there's still books being written. There's just a new book come out and say they know who betrayed the family. But you know, it's too late. There's nobody alive from this period, and even if they say it was so and so, it is no proof. That will remain a mystery.
So let us go now. Your family was betrayed and was sent in, first in a prison, and then they were sent in a cattle car all the way heading towards Auschwitz. You knew, your family knew about Auschwitz and about what was going on there. Tell us how your family knew about it.
We did know because the BBC sent broadcast out. BBC is a British broadcast corporation, about the war to all the occupied countries in their own language. And the Dutch one was at 9 o'clock, I remember very clearly, and it started with da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. That's the BBC from London, and you were not allowed to listen to the BBC, only to Dutch or German radio, because they told all the wars they were the battles they were winning, never a defeat, you know. And but by 44, of course, they were already losing badly. But so that the ordinary people didn't know, but people who listened to the radio knew. But the BBC told as well about how the war was going, and as well an invasion was planned in 1944, and the war won't last much longer, as they always said, and don't give up hope. But they told as well about the 300 concentration camp and death camps in Germany and Poland, where Jewish people were systematically being gassed. That was always one of the sentences which they said. And Auschwitz was always mentioned because that was the biggest.
So
but when we went, you know, they never told us anything. They didn't say you're going to go to Auschwitz. They just pushed us in the train and closed the doors, and that was it.
How many days was it that you were in this?
It was dark. It could have been 3 or 4 days. And of course, no air. Food was once a day, so big chunks of bread was thrown in, like animals, you know. And people fainted. It was terrible. But it was the last time that we were together as a family.
This one moment when I read in your book, which was actually very emotional when I did read it, as a father myself, your father, the last time your family was together, he looked at you and apologized. He said, I'm sorry to you that he won't be able to take care of you and protect you anymore.
Exactly.
And for a father to tell that
can
to a
imagine
child.
that is a very, very difficult thing for a father to admit that he can't protect his own family.
And he gave you a gift before. He gave you a jacket and a hat, and he said, hold on to this. Tell us what happened when you arrived and you realized it was Auschwitz, and what happened?
When we arrived at Auschwitz, there were dogs barking and a lot of Nazis, and as well people in striped uniforms. And the first thing was men and women to different sides, because if you've been in Auschwitz, you might have seen that there's a huge, huge area, 10 square miles, perhaps, or even bigger, and different camps. And Auschwitz was a men camp with that famous sign, Arbeit macht frei, and then Birkenau was a women's camp. And that was where the train was at the time, went into the part of Birkenau. And that's where you know this famous picture with a watchtower. And everything was surrounded by electrified barbed wire. And so the first thing was men and women to different parts of the camp. And you can imagine thinking that those couples and father and daughter and mother and son will probably never see each other again. So, you know, everybody started crying and holding on to each other, and very, very, very emotional and sad episode. And then the men walked away, and then the first selection was taking place. And that was something which happened really all the time. And you might have heard the name of Dr. Mengele. He was a camp doctor, a proper, really a medical man, but he wasn't there to help people, but he was there to decide on the spot who was going to live and who was going to die. Can you imagine a man deciding this, seeing children, sending them to the wrong side, knowing that they're going to be killed? He was about 35 years old at the time. And the sad thing is that he got away. He escaped and went to live in Brazil or Argentina, and went to visit Switzerland and Germany many times after the war with his own name, and nothing happened to him.
Tell us to the time you wrote that when they told you that you were going to go take a shower.
Well, the first thing, of course.
You knew what the showers were. And,
well, we didn't, you know, but you don't want to know. So, so when we went in, about half our transport of the people, so all older people, they didn't ask how old, but if you looked a bit worn after the terrible journey, you could have gone as well to the wrong side. And of course, all children. But I put on this coat and hat, and the hat had a big rim. And when Mengele, just a matter of a fraction of a second, he looked at you, and he didn't see how young I was. So that is how I escaped the first selection. Wow. So my mother and me both entered the camp. And so after this selection, we were taken into a huge, huge barrack. The next command was undressed completely naked, because all our clothes, all our belongings, whatever we brought with us, was taken away. And so naked we stood there, and then we were all tattooed. You've seen here on that film, everybody got a number. And and then all our hair was shaved. And that took many, many, many hours. And while this was going on, they told us, and this is what I object most, that with pleasure and laughing, that the people who had gone the other direction, just the children and the older people, were taken to a shower. And the people went there, and it was a relief to get a wash after this terrible journey. But no water came. And so they waited and asked each other, at the other end, any water come in your end? No. And there were really pipes. And then people started to have breathing difficulties and started to faint and fell to the floor. And within 15 minutes, everybody had been killed. And they told us that. Can you imagine if a mother had just lost her child? So that was again, you know, people started to cry, and really awful scenes. And then we were told we are going to go to the shower. Of course, we didn't want to go, but we were pushed in, and then they called more Nazis, and it was a shower. So, and then still naked, we walked out, and there were two huge heaps, one with clothes, and we were shown one garment, which could have been a night dress or a winter coat, just what was lying there. And you know, sometimes in rags. And then 2 shoes. Never a pair, never anything with laces. Sometimes a big shoe which you lost when you ran, so you were barefoot. And that was all we had. Never a piece of toilet paper, no underwear, nothing. And then we were herded into our barracks. Again, you might have seen the women thing much worse than the men. 3 high bunks, the width of where we sit perhaps here, and 8 people had to sleep in there. So we had to sleep like spoons. If one turned, we all had to turn. There was not enough room. And what was a very, very bad thing, in the morning we got our little bit of liquid, and in the evening a big chunk of bread. And that was it, nothing the whole day. And some people wanted to keep some of the bread for the next day, but you know, you had nowhere to keep anything. So the only thing was to put it under your head when you slept. And it happened very often when you woke up in the morning, it was gone, because the person next to you ate it when it was falling, when your head fall off and the bread was there, ate it away. So you had
were with your
usually
mother,
nothing to eat the whole day.
You were with your mother for a period of time until they separated you from your mother. Please tell us what that moment was like, because it was very comforting that you did have your mother for that period of time.
Well, that helped me a lot, I must admit that, you know. And as well, my mother gave me very often a little bit of her bread ration, so she starved even more than I did. And so one day, we had every week we had a shower because we were full of lice. And the Germans didn't like that because the lice went on them as well sometimes, of course. So we were deloused. And shower, and because washing during the week was impossible, so we were filthy. And so we went in our shower and we came out and a selection was taking place. And there stood this Mengele with some of us SS people, and still our Dutch transport, and we walked in front of him, had to turn around, he looked us over, naked, can you imagine? And I passed and my mother followed after me, and she had become very thin, I must admit that. And so he picked her out to be selected and killed with about 40 other women from our Dutch transport. And those naked women walked out, and I thought I'd lost my mother.
You had many miracles that happened to you while you were there. Your mother being separated, and you met this friend of yours that worked in the hospital as a nurse in Auschwitz.
A relative.
A
that
relative.
Was amazing.
And she was able to save your mother from...
but I didn't know that for many, many months. You know, for 3 months I thought I'd really lost my mother.
Wow.
And that was for me, of course, the worst time. It became winter, and I had terrible frostbite on my feet, open toes, already getting infected, and it was very, very cold. It was one of the coldest winter on record, and I was struggling, you know. I didn't have much strength to carry on, and I was nearly on the point of giving up. And that was really, everybody will tell you, every survivor, when you gave up mentally, within a few days you would be dead. Because your body had no strength anymore. Only through really very, very strong mental perseverance did you have a chance to make it. But if you start to give up, to think, well, I don't think I can make it, then within a few days you would die.
The Frank family, Anne and Otto and his wife, were also sent. Did you ever see them in the camps?
No, never. Well, never in the camps. Otto, of course, would have been in the men's camp, and the women camp. They were quite clever as well, you know. There was A, B, C, D camp, and they never let a later transport come to older inmates, because then they might have told us what is happening outside. If we would have known that the invasion had already happened, because the Frank knew that, But we didn't know that, had no idea about that. That would have been giving us more hope. So I never saw them. I didn't know actually that they'd been in hiding. But you didn't tell anybody.
So go back now to the time that they gave jobs, and you were lucky enough, miraculously, they gave you a job called Canada, which was the best job of the better jobs in the concentration death camp. And this job was, you went through the clothes of the new arrivals that came into the camps. The Nazis were so cruel, they wanted to get everything. As the Jews were coming in, they hid their jewelry and other stuff, cigarettes and everything, into their garments, and pictures of their family, and they made you go through it to find anything and give it to the Germans. So you had that job.
All the valuables, coins, money, gold, jewelry.
And you were lucky at that time doing this job. You came across your father.
3 weeks. Yeah, for 3 weeks I was doing that. And we even found food, so it wasn't so bad that. And we had a lunch break even, which normally you didn't. And I saw my father across the fence. And he asked me, can you get me cigarettes? And I was surprised because he never smoked. And he said, can you throw me cigarettes over? And I said, well, I'll find them, but you never smoked. He said, well, but they're good bargaining power, because with cigarettes he probably could get some food.
Wow.
Because, the Polish people, and there were lots of Polish people, criminals, and they were the capos. They really ran the camp under the order of the Nazis, and they were able to get food parcels.
Was that the last time you saw your father?
No, I saw him again after my mother had been selected, and as I told you, I was nearly on the point of giving up mentally. I was called out, somebody wants to see me, and I thought, well, that's the end, I'm going to be shot. And I go outside, and there stood my father with his SS boss. And till this day, and I will never ever know how he was able to get permission to come, and how he knew where I was in this, where 100,000 of people were. But the terrible thing was that, of course, he asked me where my mother was, and I had told him that she had been killed. And I saw my father crumple up in front of me. That was for him the worst. That he started to cry, and then I started to cry, and then he said, but Hans is all right, and we'll make it. He tried to, because he realized in a bad way I was, he tried to give me courage. But I saw he came 3 times to see me, and then I never ever saw him again.
Tell us at the time now that the camp was liberated by the Russians before the war was over, and you woke up one morning and you realized that the guards were all gone. They ran, and you were, again, miraculously, they didn't take you on the death march, as they did at the end of the camps.
That was again a miracle that my mother and me didn't go, but we stayed behind. We would never ever have made it.
So
that is 100% clear.
If everyone in the audience just said, so at the end of the war, when they realized the Russians were coming into Auschwitz, they basically took everybody. They couldn't have transports, and walking by feet, which the inmates had no strength. They walked for days and days, and if you fell behind, you were shot. And most people didn't make it, and you were again lucky enough not to get selected to go on this march.
Yeah.
And you woke up. Tell us that morning you woke up and you realized that
the Nazis had gone.
Are gone.
And there were about 500 women left. And by the way, my mother and me were reunited again by that time. It was again an unbelievable miracle. And we could have gone out, but we were too weak, and the snow was that high. And so we stayed. And after about 10 days, the Russian army came. And but they were pursuing the Nazis, so they just stayed the night with a field kitchen and fed us, and fed themselves, of course. And they gave us big metal bowls with cabbage soup, very greasy soup. But the smell nearly drove us mad. It was the first, it can smell very, very good. And we just ate, but I've never had such a bad, painful night on a bucket, because the food went right through me. But you know, the next day many people had died from overeating. And and the Russians left again, and we were left again on our own. And so I decided I would go to the men camps to try to find my father and brother. And so that was about 3 miles, a big, difficult journey through the snow. And I got there, and I went to look again. There were about 500 men left. And I found a person who looked vaguely familiar, but he was ashen and very, very thin. And I looked at him and said, I think I know you. He said, yeah, I'm Otto Frank, Anna's father. Have you seen my girls or my wife? And I hadn't seen them. But he had seen my father and my brother, and he said, well, they had gone a few weeks ago with the Nazis. But I didn't know about the death marches, of course, so I had great hope that they were still alive. That was January, was his Holocaust Memorial Day. Don't know if you celebrate it here as well. And the liberation of Auschwitz. And very often people ask me, well, you were free, that was it. I say, no, it wasn't it at all, because the war wasn't finished, and we were in the middle of Poland, and we didn't know, we were still very weak. Many people actually still died afterwards. And we didn't know where we ever be able to get back, what will happen to us. But the Russians decided they would evacuate it from there, and they took us eastward, because we couldn't go to the west. And that I want to point out, the Russians treated us very, very well, with great respect. They fed us, they clothed us, they gave us actually Russian uniforms. And you know, they were fighting a really very, very fierce war, but they still looked after all of us. Till we ended up in Odessa. So, and that was in May. So all the time they moved us around. And on the train, actually, I lost my mother again once. And they never told us where we were going to go, so I thought, well, that's it. Now in the middle of Russia, my mother is lost, and I will never find her. But after a week, she did come and find me again. Oh. So, you know, I had another miracle.
I'd like to move forward just to go back now to Anne Frank. You realized in your book you write, you found out that through the Red Cross that your brother and father did not survive. And then you came back to Amsterdam.
Well, that is already, we didn't know till we got back to Amsterdam. So that was in June.
So you came back to Amsterdam.
And Otto Frank was with us on this journey.
So tell us about Otto Frank finding out about Anne and what happened with that, and how, because he lost his wife and his 2 daughters.
Yeah, well, he heard already on the transport with the Russian a woman who was there when his wife died, so he knew about his wife. But he always said he has great hope for his children, that they would still be alive somewhere.
When did he find out about his daughters?
And well, all of us, you know, when we got to Amsterdam, we put adverts in the paper, and we went around people to find out, where have you been, which camp, have you perhaps come across this and this person. And Otto met 2 sisters who had been in Bergen-Belsen with Anna and Margot, and realized that they had died, so they were able to tell him. And at that time, Miep Gies, the woman who was one of the helpers, gave Otto the diary.
Did Otto know about the diary?
Oh yes, he knew about the diary because Otto had a briefcase, and every evening when Anna finished writing her diary, she gave it to Otto to keep in his briefcase. And and Miep Gies found it.
Now, Miep Gies was this lady that helped hide the Frank family, and she never wanted to give up the diary until she met one of the Franks, Otto.
Well, when Otto came back, he didn't know yet that Anna wouldn't return, so she didn't give it to him then. Only when Otto told her that Anna would never return, did she give it to him. And he came to us with a little parcel, and he opened it very, very carefully, and he said, can I read you something? And he read a few lines, but he always burst into tears. It took him 3 weeks to read it. And after he's read it, he was really amazed, because he never read anything before. And he liked what you said before. He said, I didn't even know my child properly. He was very, very close to Anne. They were, you know, Margot was close with her mother, but Anne had actually a very sad relationship with her mother. But many teenage girls seem to have that. I must say I hadn't. I was very, very close to my mother. But I know my daughter has a daughter, and they had, when she was growing up, when she was 15, 16, again they had a bit of, perhaps it's a competition, but it passes, you know. And what I've heard is that in the camp they were reconciled again. Well, but a little while they were together, but then the girls were taken away, but the wife died then.
So interesting that happened was that after Otto found out that his wife and his daughters unfortunately perished, he became very close to your mother.
Yeah.
And tell us about that, how, and actually ended up marrying in 1956, they ended up marrying, and Otto, Anne's father, became your stepdad.
Yeah.
Tell us about how that happened.
Yeah. Well, when I came back, and when I heard that my father and brother would never come back, and you know, I hadn't accepted it. I thought if I had survived, my father was such a strong, healthy person, he must come back. And many, many people were in German displaced people camp and came back after a few years. And so each time a car came, I went to the window, was sure my father was coming back. And that made you, of course, if you don't accept that somebody had died, it makes it even more difficult. So I became really, I hated everybody. I was very, very, very miserable. I even wrote a little note that life has no purpose without my family. I would like to commit suicide. I was in such a very, very bad state. And Otto Frank came very often to our house, and he realized I was a child who needed help, and he helped me a great deal. He, who had lost everybody, had no hatred in him. And he said to me, when you hate everybody, you know, you will be miserable. The people you hate, they don't know, they won't suffer, but you will suffer. And that was true.
And he actually protected you, Otto. You ended up coming back to school after the war, which must have been a very difficult transition.
I didn't want to go to school. I thought after having gone through, I'm already an adult, you know, what should I do with those children? And I couldn't relate to them. And so I had a bad time in school, but I finished actually quite well. I didn't want any spare time, so I learned really a lot.
So Otto got you a job in England.
And when I didn't know what to do, I didn't really care what was going to happen with my life. And Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. And he gave me his good camera, a Leica. And because he said he has no family, I'm not going to take any more pictures. And everybody wants his Leica now. Every museum said, what are you doing with your Leica? Can we have it? I said, no, it's my present from Otto. I'm keeping it. And anyway, and I used it, of course, a lot. I made many, many lovely pictures with this good camera.
And over there in England, when you went, you actually ended up meeting somebody who ended up becoming your husband. Tell us about that experience.
Well, yes. I went for a year to England, and I lived in a little boarding house, and there came a young man from Israel to study economics. And we went for long walks, but both of us didn't really tell anything about who we were, you know. I told him I was Dutch, which I wasn't. I was actually stateless. He told me he was an Israeli, which he wasn't. He was a German refugee. And you know, in England, that was in 51, so 6 years after the war, there was still very, very bad rationing, food rationing. And you could have cigarettes or chocolate, but very little, and many people smoked. So everybody bought cigarettes, and chocolate was Nobody really had chocolate. And my mother sent me chocolate from Holland always, very famous Dutch chocolate. And as soon as I got the parcel, I got a knock on my door, and this young man came in. Oh, can I come and have a chat with you? And he saw my chocolate. Oh, you got chocolate? So that is how we started to like each other. And we went for long walks. We both didn't have money. And then after about 6 months, he said to me, Eva, I've fallen in love with you. Will you marry me? And when I'm finished studying, we can go and start a new life in Israel. And I said, no, thank you. And he was a bit taken aback, but he thought, well, I'm sure I'm going to change my mind. And then Otto Frank came over one day, and I told him I met this young, nice man, and he wanted to marry me, but I said no. And he said, well, he was a bit embarrassed. He said, your mother and me have fallen in love as well, and once you get settled, we like to get married. So I went back to this young man. I said, well, you can marry me now. and he was very happy. And that was we went immediately to Amsterdam and arranged a wedding, a very small wedding. And because we didn't know anybody in England in 1952. And a year later, Otto and my mother got married, 1953. And they were married for 27 years. Longer than they were married with their first spouses. And it was really a very, very, very happy marriage. So Otto was 17 years older than my mother, but it didn't really matter at all. And my mother lost him, of course, when he was 90 years old.
Wow.
And she was a widow for 17 years, but she lived as well till 93. So, yeah, that was...
And your husband, you were together for how many years?
We were married for 62 years, and I speak a lot in England in schools, and I tell that as well, and I show photos of our wedding and my husband, and I said, we were married for 62 years, and they said, with how many husbands? And I said, just one.
Just a few more questions, because the time we could go on all night. We have in this crowd a lot of young people, students and young adults. And today, in America and around the world, many are hurting with loneliness and challenges, friendship. There's really no sense of identity. Many people are searching, and there's a sense of really depression is on a high by many youth.
Young people have depression sometimes.
So I want to just to jump to this is, you, after the war, you told me that it was quite more difficult after the war for you than during the war. Living in the concentration camps, being beaten, but yet afterwards was so much more difficult. How did you have the courage and the strength to really create a life and have, thank God, you have daughters and you have 5 grandchildren now. And really, what's the message we could tell myself and the community that's here tonight and the youth?
Well, I know Chabad has this good family life, and this is really what saved me, I must admit, you know. In the camp, I was always wanting, first of all, you don't want to die when you're 15 years old, but I really wanted to have a boyfriend, I wanted to get married, I wanted to have a family, to live this life like my parents had a good life, a wonderful family. And this really kept me going, and this is really what was so important. And nowadays, unfortunately, everybody is so busy, and everybody goes on their telephones and on their internet and on computer. There is not anymore the family life which one used to have. Even when we were in Holland, before we went into hiding, but when we had the curfew, we were not allowed to go out after 7 o'clock in the evening. You know, we spent our evenings, my father taught us bridge. I was one of the best young bridge player with 13, I think. And, you know, we talked about our days, what has happened, and if we had a problem, I could go to my father or my mother and get it out with them. And I know now in England too, the children can't go to the parents because they're busy. And that's why they get depression and they get on internet, they get bullied and things like that, which we didn't have. So but what is the point, you know? All those little things are not really so bad. Bad things is there is a bad illness in the family, if there's a death in the family, but all those little things we can get over. And the young people take themselves much too serious. You know, little things, if they don't get an ice cream, or if they can't have a day off or something, or go to a certain party, that's not the end of the world. And life has so much to offer. You know, nature is beautiful. When I live in a little flat in London and I have beautiful sunset, and if I had a difficult day and I go out in the terrace and see the lovely sunset, it's uplifting, you know. Enjoy nature, enjoy your friends, but enjoy, you know, talk with them, enjoy your family. There's so much wonderful things in the world. Life is something we have to treasure and enjoy, and help other people who have more difficulty. If you do a good deed, you feel 100% better than if you demand something from somebody.
Two quick last questions. Your mother and stepdad, Otto Frank, was instrumental in bringing the diary to life. It's in 70 languages now. One of the most read books behind the Bible in the world. I want just to capture, I understand that they received boxes of letters every single day, people writing to them. And every single day, your mother and Otto Frank would sit down and respond to every single letter that came.
In great detail.
And that's what really kept them alive, the attachment that they had.
And in touch with so many people, yes.
Correct. So just tell us, how did Anne really ever believe that this, look what came of this story, the life of her. She was hoping to go, but for Otto, you know, to live on a beautiful life, a talented young girl. But for Otto Frank, what this meant to him and to your mother, just to mention to everyone that Eva's brother did not survive, but was an artist and made some beautiful paintings which were later found in the home that they were captured underneath the floorboards. And I believe it was 30 pictures that they found, beautiful pieces of art that now sits in a museum in Europe. So tell us about that, the connection that they had through the pictures and the amazing work of this diary, which your mother and Otto were very instrumental in bringing this gift to the world.
Yes, when Otto came with the diary, and it was actually in the cattle truck that my brother told me about his artwork, which he had hidden in this house where they were blackmailed. And so after the war, when Otto got the diary from Anne and it helped him, I said to my mother, we have to go and get Heinz's paintings, which we did. And we found these 30 artworks and as well 200 poems. He wrote as well wonderful poetry. And, you know, he always used to say, he's afraid of dying. He was such a sensitive young man. And so one day we asked my father, what will happen when we die? And my father said to him, well, if you have children, you live on in your children. And then he said, but what if I die before I have any children? And my father thought a moment, and then he said, nothing get lost. Whatever you have done, even if it's in a short life, somebody will remember. We are all a link in a big chain which goes from generation to generation. And Anne Frank says as well, when she dies, she would like to become immortal. And she has succeeded. And so I wrote this second book, The Promise, so that my brother won't be forgotten. And the paintings are in Amsterdam in the Resistance Museum. I donated them a few years ago. And when I was in South Africa, I told them the story about my brother, and they decided they would make an exhibition about his life. That was in Durban. and they made it, and it's traveling in South Africa, it has been in Cape Town, in Johannesburg, and we have now a copy of that in England as well, and we are working now to get a copy of this as well in America. And you know, this is really what we all want to, that when we have lived a life, could be short or longer, but that we will be remembered.
You know, for many, to everyone here, the closing remarks, and we'll ask Eva to say something. For 40 plus years, you did not talk about your story. You kept it very private until a period of time, and a story you write, why you told your story and wrote your book, and made the connection to Anne Frank and let the world know. For me, myself, when I was told that she has a stepsister, I did not believe it. But I'd like to tell everyone in this crowd that, and ask Eva what her thoughts are. For me, sitting with you just a few feet away, the eyes that I look at, the hands, the feet, the hair, this is somebody that is really the story of history that unfortunately there are people today that deny. While survivors still live, there are people that deny the Holocaust ever happened. And I read those stories, and now I see someone actually that experienced it. The same hands, the same eyes saw Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, that brutally killed so many people. And so I ask is to tell everyone, first of all, how that feels to hear that there's about the denying even today. And really the lasting message, what I'd like to, if you could share with everyone here, far after everyone is gone, the message they could take home and think about is what you've seen over your lifespan of, thank God, of many, many, as they say, lange gesunde Jahren, many, many happy more years to come in health. What's the message of your history, of what you've seen and what you see today in the world, in a democratic country like England, and you travel the world, is tell everyone here what we could do to make sure that that never happens again, that how we as a people have to care for each other regardless of a creed, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity. You told me that your husband used to say that we are all one race.
Exactly.
That's my ultimately dream.
It's a human race.
The human race. And so what's the departing messages that you would like to share with everyone here tonight that they could take home and forever be able to told that you heard from a survivor that lived through seeing Joseph Mengele, saw Auschwitz concentration camp, saw the gas chambers that took the lives of 1.5 million children, many of family we all know, and share with them. And it's really to tell everyone sitting here, this is a real honor, because this is somebody that physically, it's not a movie, this is real life. She's not acting, this is reality. And to have someone that experienced it is humbling. With all our challenges that we face, to see someone with such a bright smile and with so much courage and so much strength to live such a beautiful life, and to have children and grandchildren beautifully grown. So tell us how you did it, and what's the message we could all go home with?
Well, life is given to us. We have to make the most of it. We have to share it with everybody. We have given a wonderful planet. We have to look after that and not destroy it, what we are slowly doing. And we have given riches. We have to share this with everybody. And we have to stop this racism and prejudice against different religion or different races. Because like we said, you know, there's only one race, the human race, and it can be different colored, can have different beliefs, but as long as people, like Anne says, people are good at heart, we have to, and we have not to be bystanders. We have to have the courage to speak up if we see injustice being done, and we have to share our riches with other people. I've been now in downtown Los Angeles, and the rabbi there showed me a rich country like America that have whole rows and whole streets and whole areas with people living in tents in the street.
We showed her the homeless that goes. She wanted to see what's going on with the homeless, and she was shocked to see the tents.
I know in London too we have here and there people sleeping on the street, but this is a whole community of people who sleep outside and have nothing. I mean, this is really, it is...
You mentioned to me if all the money we used for all the military ammunition, if we just used to help the homeless, every person would have their own home.
Easily. And we get food, we get 65 million refugees, partly for people who are starving because there's drought in the country. We can feed everybody with the riches. So I think one of the most important things is to try to disarm the world, because this is a complete waste to make weapons, which, and especially atomic weapons, which we can never ever use. When America used the bombs on Japan, one didn't know about the effect of the radiation. We thought it was just a big bomb which can end the war, which would have been okay. But the effect of the radiation is something which can really destroy the whole life on Earth. And that is, nobody wants that. So we have to really stop this.
To tell everyone that her book is here outside and she'll be sitting by the table. Anyone who would like to get a signed copy, she'll be sitting for a little while. And it's a real privilege and honor to have you here in Manhattan Beach, California. And it's, for everyone here, it's really will go back for many, many years. They'll say they saw a living legend, Anne Frank's stepsister, a survivor, someone with so much courage and strength and beauty. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful evening.